The city's history is a city of change. Ever since my predecessor, the earlier Welsh or Celtic city planning officer Boudicca, had that trouble with classical architecture. I don't know who it was an emperor of Rome rather than a prince in those days, but we had to repulse classical architecture once before, you remember. But to be fair to the Romans, they did leave behind some very good restaurants. And where would it be without Pizza Express? The city's change has gone through cycles. There have been periods when change has been, shall we say, on the ascendant, after the times like the Fire of London, and after the last war. And then there were periods equally where the city rather sat back and assumed things would go on as they were. Now, when I arrived in the city in 1985 to take over as city planning officer, that was rather a period of the doldrums. The city had been it finished the post-war reconstruction. It got back to the sort of situation it was in pre-war, with the stockbrokers and the stock jobbers and the bankers and people wearing top hats carrying messages around the city, and it was rather contented. And then, of course, Margaret Thatcher, no lover of the City of London, decided to deregulate the whole show. I arrived in 1985 just after the announcement of deregulation, and we knew we had a year to get ready for it. We knew the Yanks were coming. And in fact they did, and one of the key changes architecturally was Roger Calman getting off an aircraft at Heathrow with a roll of drawings. They were on yellow detail paper, something we'd never seen before, and above all they were drawn in pencil. Now, I'd been brought up as an architect of the Barclays in the late 60s and early 70s to believe that you had the confidence of the rotary pen to produce your drawings, that you put the mark on paper and it got built. So when British architects arrived in my office in those days, in the mid-80s, with their drawings, the last thing they wanted to do was to have to take a razor blade to those drawings to correct them. I mean, it was a bit of a fag getting rid of rotary ink lines off a drawing. The Americans, however, arriving with their yellow detail paper and pencil drawings, simply had to use an eraser. Well, we called them rubbers, but they didn't like that. They thought that was a bit rude. So it was much easier for them. And of course, coming by air from places like Chicago, they didn't have to bring, well, they couldn't bring models, whereas the British architects used to turn up with their developers at meetings with me with a model made by Pipers, of course. It already had a brass plate on it, which made you think it was sort of final. And they'd come into the office, and I'd say, "Why are you here?" And they'd say, "Well, we've come to consult you on our development." I said, "No, you haven't. You've come to present your development. It's not the same thing at all. It's finished. There's no point involving the planners when you've finished your scheme." And they said, well, it's the way we've always done it. When do you want to be involved? I said, "Well, I want to be involved at the back of the envelope stage, preferably before you've drawn on the envelope. Come in with your client and involve us in the process right from the start. So that by the end of the consultation process, I believe in the scheme as much as the developer and the architect, and I can then sell it to the planning committee. And I see that as my role, selling the scheme that I have helped to work on over maybe 6 months, or even longer period than that." Little by little, the 6 firms of architects who had a stranglehold on the city realised that it was no longer possible to just wind the crank and roll out the same building that they got planning permission for the year before, because that had been what was happening. Thin films of Portland stone you could almost see through, cladding the same old frame, the same old building, going up on every street block in the city. Those American drawings, those yellow detail pencil drawings, rather shook the architectural fraternity in London. And people realised they had to do things more efficiently and have more variety in their designs. Stuart Lipton had started building Broadgate and was bringing in these techniques from America, techniques of construction, which you've already heard about. That was important. There was one mould-breaking building already underway in the city, and that was Lloyd's, Richard Rogers Lloyd's, which was thought to be very peculiar. I remember the planning committee, although I wasn't involved in the process, as it was being completed, one of the members of the planning committee asked me a question and said, "Well, when are the construction cranes coming down? The scaffolding's gone." And I said, "Well, no, those are for cleaning the windows." "What?" We didn't approve those. Yes, they were on the drawings. Yes, but we assumed they were to build it with. So there'd obviously been a little misunderstanding on the part of the city, and I'm sure Lloyds of London had never quite envisaged what it was they were getting. And of course they had the comfort blanket of their old boardroom reassembled inside. Very much a comfort blanket. But that was the only building at the time when I arrived that was changing the city's approach to architecture. A picture of the city in 1985, the one the world's media always used, London Bridge in the morning rush hour. The stream of commuters, bowler hats, rolled umbrellas, coming across from London Bridge Station, so telephoto shots, they were all punched up, coming across the pavement into the city, heads down, coming to work in a workplace. And at 5 o'clock, they couldn't wait to get out again. By 8 o'clock in the evening, all the pubs had closed, in spite of the best efforts of myself and the rest of the planning department to keep them open. It had all shut down. Weekends, nothing at all. Contrast that with the situation that we have today. What do the world's media show? Well, what does BBC World show? It shows an image of the Millennium Bridge from the South Bank, looking towards the city with St Paul's Cathedral, a skyline of Wren churches and modern architecture. Tourists thronging across the bridge into the city for the pleasure of being there, for the pleasure of seeing what was there. And that, to me, sort of symbolises the change of what we've gone through, moving from a workplace to a place in which to work, making the place, remaking the place that is, and what always was the City of London, building it around the gossip that attracts Bloomberg to build their European headquarters just across the road. They need to be where the gossip is, business needs to be where the gossip is. It's like the water hole. You don't just go for the water, you go for the gossip, you go for the hot news, and the stuff that doesn't come down the wire. That change has been wrought by a team of developers, architects from all over the world, with just a little bit of help from the planners. As soon as the American architects had stirred things up, then architects from all over the world wanted to come to work in the city. So you end up with a leading French architect begging to be able to do a building right next to St Paul's Cathedral and taking great pride in getting it right in the context. As Jean Nouvel said when he came to my office with a roll of drawings and a cardboard box, reaching into the cardboard box, he produced an Airfix construction kit of an American stealth bomber. And he said, "This is my inspiration. I have to fly under the radar of St. Paul." And I believe he has flown under the radar of St. Paul. And he's produced something which tourists come to photograph. About 4 years ago, the editor of the Time Out Guide to London, the Tourist Guide to London, approached me and said they'd like 2 pages on modern architecture in the City of London. The average Joe tourist was coming to the City of London not just to see St Paul's Cathedral and the Wren churches, but coming to see modern commercial architecture. To me, that proved that we had been effective. And the only contribution I made to any part of this process was having a low threshold of boredom. Enjoy your day.